Hey everyone, I'm Matt Ford and welcome to the Good Trouble Show. If you haven't heard by now, UAP, otherwise known as UFOs, are a real thing. Government whistleblowers are coming forward and testifying to Congress that UAP represent a serious national security issue. The Pentagon, however, is, well, keeping what it knows tightly under wraps, including a massive trove of evidence in its possession, such as photographic and video footage, much of which has not been shared with members of Congress. And that lack of transparency is exactly why the first ever 2026 UAP Tracking and Detection Summit is happening.
The Navy says it still doesn't know what the objects are.
The minute you get eyes on them, they go dark.
They must disclose more information to the public.
Unidentified anomalous phenomena, or UAP, are being reported across air, sea, and space domains. In the absence of verifiable data, misinformation fills the gap. Explanations are lacking and often contradictory, leading the public to ask, what's really going on in our skies? Recent congressional testimony has raised urgent questions about UAP. Risks to flight safety, lack of oversight, and potential challenges to national security are now being formally acknowledged by governments around the world. It's becoming clear we can no longer ignore the reality of UAP. But testimony alone is not enough. We need the full capabilities of science and technology in order to move from uncertainty to understanding. We need data. The UAP Detection and Tracking Summit convenes researchers, technologists, policymakers, and informed citizens to build new capabilities to detect, track, and analyze UAP, and gain critical understanding into the anomalous objects and craft increasingly reported over our homes, cities, and critical infrastructure. With calibrated instruments, coordinated field research, and transparent scientific collaboration, we can detect and track anomalous objects and generate the data needed to drive forward the disclosure of UAP. The technology is available. The expertise is here. The capability to understand what's in our skies is finally within reach. We invite you to join us.
Please welcome on your left, Reed Summers, and on your right, Rich Hoffman. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. I'd love for both of you to tell our audience a bit about yourselves and your organizations before we really jump into everything. And Rich, since this is your first time on the show, welcome. Let's start with you.
Oh, well, great. Thank you for having me on, Matt. I appreciate your shows, all of them. I've been at this for 61 years. I've been through many organizations. I started out with NICAP. I was also a part of MUFON. Most of my time with that 61 years. I'm actually a lifetime member of them as well. I'm also a board advisor with the Society for UAP Studies, and I'm definitely a executive board officer with the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, and I've been doing that since its inception in 2017.
Fantastic. Reed, welcome back to the show. I think this is your second time here. So yeah, tell us, for the folks not familiar with your work, tell us about yourself and your organization.
Sure. I'm the host of the Emergent podcast, where I examine the emergent new potential interface between humanity and the intelligence behind UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomena. I'm also directing strategy for a research and policy think tank called the Human Institute, which is working on designing solutions in the human interest to contend with the challenges presented by the phenomenon and to accelerate our human response to it. I'm also the creator of a forthcoming strength of evidence scoring platform called UFOevidence.com, which is a very exciting new tool that's going to be out in the public, helping the public move through evidence, rank evidence, better understand what creates strong evidence and so forth. And I am also the lead convener of the UAP Summit, which is taking place February 7th and 8th.
Awesome. And we're going to jump into that for a minute, but I want to run this by both of you. I mean, I think at this point, most people understand that, that there are things flying around in our skies and that the government, at a very minimum, hasn't been fully transparent about this whole thing, the UAP issue. How prolific is this activity, and are there any sort of like indicators that the government may be moving toward greater transparency on the issue? And Rich, I'd love to, we'll start with you. What's your take on that?
Well, I've got a kind of a long-term perspective on this. I was back in the Blue Book days, and I lived in Dayton, Ohio, which is where Project Blue Book was located at the time. And so I saw the basically how they handled it, and that was like our first foray with the government dealing with the subject, right? And they, for the most part, at that time, it was like they had a bunch of people that were running around doing case investigations, just collecting and filling out a form, and then they would go back and come up with a case conclusion. Then I saw the death of the Blue Book and, the National Academy of Sciences that were saying that there's nothing to it, dismiss it, and everything else. Push that forward through the dark ages of ufology, and suddenly now you're dealing with this exposure in 2017 with the announcement in the New York Times. There's a holistic change that's going on right now in the government from back in my early days, where you suddenly have a lot more conversations up on the Hill. You have a lot more conversations, with politicians talking about it and engaging it. You also have now an all-of-government kind of organization called AARO, which is allegedly supposed to be looking at all of government kinds of things. And they've been focusing on the military cases, and I think that that's pretty good that they're doing that. So what I've seen over my 60-some-odd years is an amazing amount of coming out of the woodwork and now talking about it, right? And openly talking about it and allegedly studying it. And what I'm going to tell you is that I still see, and I worked for 30 years with the Department of the Army. I was with Army Material Command here in Huntsville, Alabama, and I caught, like the pushback on that. Most of it was just a dismissal of the entire subject from the military. But I started to see that it was changing over a period of time where now I could have hallway conversations with military people about UFOs at the base. They were coming out and telling me about their cases. So I've seen more transparency in that regard. I've seen all the legislation coming down telling the organizations in the military to report their sightings, which is also very encouraging. So I'm very optimistic about the changes that I've seen in terms of just the overall thing. Would I like to see more? Well, most definitely, I'd like to see more, and I'd like to see a lot more transparency. And I think that we've got to work through all the issues with, the classification settings on some of these things, because some of these things are overclassified. And so I think that there's a need to be able to be more transparent with the public, even about your procedures, how you're handling case investigations. I think AARO could be way more transparent, and that would allow trust to happen a lot more. Do I think that they're doing a good job with it? Well, maybe. Do I think that there's a whole lot of a lot more pilots and things reporting their cases to them? I don't think that that's necessarily the case. I think that there's still a distrust of them doing that as well. So, I'm kind of like saying, I think we ought to have more. I'm encouraging more. Do I really believe that the disclosure is right around the corner? No, I've been hearing about it for 60 years.
That's right. I mean, Reed, when I look at this, you'll hear presidents such as former President Obama and others say, yes, there's something going on out there, but then it almost feels like we get these sort of mixed messages out of the Pentagon. Yes, you have AARO, but then they'll say, the former AARO director, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, will come out and say, oh, there's no evidence of extraterrestrials. Reed, it always sort of seems like a mixed bag. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think that, in general, the trend is towards more transparency on this issue from the government?
I think the issue is moving, and the public is engaged and is looking. And we're at a moment of what you might call a singularity on the issue. I think we're approaching that moment of singularity where there's enough public eyes, public cameras on the skies. There are enough individuals, former military, DOD, and IC coming forward as whistleblowers with credible testimony to provide. And our capabilities technologically to detect and track UAP are rising as well, as is the prevalence of the phenomenon. And it is my understanding that UAP activity is hockey sticking over the last few years. And I think some of that is what we saw in the mystery drone crises of 2024 and 25. Not entirely, but there were some indications of non-prosaic craft as part of what citizens were seeing. So we have crowded skies. The skies are not secure. The skies are not under our control. We have complete civilian blindness as to what's above our heads, above our homes and cities, and the critical infrastructure that keeps our nation and states running. And that's not acceptable. It's not acceptable to ignore UAP anymore. And I think the public knows that. I have hundreds of UFO conversations all the time with people out there in the public. And the appetite and the curiosity, and also just this intrinsic, almost like intuitive sense that there's a layer of reality that we're now interacting with. We're observing it. We don't understand it. It's not a part of our conceptual framework for life and for the natural Earth human system. But it's real and people know it. And I think so we're sliding in that direction. I think if anything, elements of the DoD or the IC or the legacy program, as it's called, are digging in their heels, fighting tooth and nail, continuing efforts at misinformation and disinformation, and attempting to redirect and misdirect the conversation and the discourse. And that's why, Rich, my work with you on the UAP Summit and other things is so critical, is to get the public in a data-driven, evidence-based conversation on UAP. And it's possible now.
I completely agree with that. So let's shift gears. Let's talk about the UAP Summit. Reed, what is the summit and how did it come about?
Sure. Well, the UAP Summit is a 2-day online conference dedicated to advancing the science, technology, and policies surrounding UAP. We're bringing together 30 world-class experts on everything from technology and multi-sensor detection to science and media dialogue and education in the public, to policymakers as well, to look at, how can we converge all of our capabilities as civilian, international science and research organizations to detect and track UAP and provide credible and impactful data and analysis to the public and to decision makers. I think we have to ward off efforts by, the DOW or the DOD to reaggregate the conversation, penetrate these organizations, see what they're learning, access their data, secretize their findings, put them under classification and NDA requirements. We have to ward that effort off and begin to gather this nascent citizen coalition of the educated and the willing to go out into the field and to technically detect UAP and corroborate those findings with high-impact testimony from first responders and Homeland Security professionals. So during the summit, we're going to have 30 different speakers, 14 sessions, 3 panels with individuals, experts on all of those topics. And we're at the center of the summit focusing on the roughly 10 or so groups internationally who are currently or soon to be out in the field detecting UAP and providing that data to the public. And so we have a lot of exciting outcomes from the summit that we're working on, which we can get into. But it's a 2-day event, spots are limited, and we've got amazing participants already registering for the summit to take part in it. So highly recommend people be part of the conversation.
And we'll get into some of those participants and what's on the program here in a minute. Rich, what are some of the challenges facing the community when it comes to detection, field observation, and collaboration between civilian and these sort of nonprofit groups that could lead to real scientific breakthroughs on UAP?
We'd love a phenomena that we knew where it was going to appear, when it was going to appear, that we could actually position equipment, and everything else there. The problem has been with the phenomena is that it's a rare phenomena. There's a lot of misidentifications throughout, that I dealt with. I mean, I saw all the time people were misidentifying planets, stars, everything you can think of. Drones now have come into the mix, and that's adding into the mix in terms of just the sheer mistakes that people make. But there is a real phenomena, and it's about when do you get that real phenomena? And the problem we've had with is that again, having the right equipment or many pieces of equipment at a given location at a time where an event is going to take place is the most challenging and daunting of all the different things we got going on. So that is really, really important. The next thing is also the fact that, as you very well know, you can have all kinds of problems with equipment. equipment if it's not calibrated properly, or if it's not set right, or if there's interference, can cause all kinds of challenges as well. You can get misidentifications from interference. We've seen that happen numerous times. So it's also about getting, let me give you an example. Most people report the fact that UFOs or UAP are silent. Well, do you have something that can hear above the human range of hearing or below it? And do you have that kind of equipment? And not necessarily the case that we have that. So are they making noises that we just can't hear because we're not registering them? We're just starting to get technologies that are capable of going out and seeing these things in other parts of the electromagnetic spectrum. We're starting to see IR images. We have like those kinds of things, but we're still new at interpreting what that's supposed to look like on that IR reading that we're getting. And there's also some challenges you have to understand about even that IR technology that you might have. Sensors can also detect things that are necessarily, like I talked with Randy Bostic, who was formerly with Arrow, right? And him and I met in Dayton, Ohio. And he was telling me about a case where they had sensors that were seeing some unusual behavior, but it turned out when they found out it was aircraft that were over 300 miles away that were somehow being detected by these sensors. And you're finding out that you have to understand the sensors and even the distance that they might be able to register things. So I'm just telling you that there's technology challenges like that we have to work through. And then plus it's about getting all those things linked up to have multimodal kind of technology to be able to see these things in those other parts of the spectrum, and getting away from the blurry photographs that we all want to see and that people talk about, oh, that's a blurry object, right? Well, my God, cameras, you've now got ISOs that are in the millions where you can make night look like day. You also have cameras that can shoot 1,000 frames a second and can now see that instantaneous acceleration that's going on with that craft and see it. So we've got to get those kinds of technologies, and they cost a lot of money, but we have to get those things positioned out in a place where we're wanting it to happen, hopefully, that we'll have an event happen.
Yeah, talking about things outside of human hearing range, I think my wife's voice falls into that area. But joking aside, I mean, Rich, one of the challenges, it seems, is that in terms of seeing real evidence from the government, one thing that they constantly fall back on is, it seems to me, is that footage, sensor data, it's all classified. So everything that they have, because it's all in this sensor bucket or data bucket that is all classified, it seems like that's perhaps one of the reasons that the only thing that we've really seen come out of the government are just a handful of videos. Do you think this effort by independent scientists and organizations not related to the government, does that help potentially fill in that data gap?
Without a doubt. So let me give you an example of exactly what you're saying. Like when we looked at the Aguadilla case that was in Puerto Rico, that was that video. We were trying to study that and see what we could find out. Well, first off, we had to understand, is this like not a fake thing? So was there really an aircraft there? We looked at the transponder data. We got that. We found out it was a legitimate military aircraft that was taking off. And then the next thing is you're looking at IR, because they turn the camera on and you're suddenly seeing what it looks like in IR. And then you're trying to interpret things like the distance of the object away from the camera. And there's a whole lot of metadata that's around the actual image, the video that we looked at. We broke it into over 3,027 frames or something of that nature, and looked at individual frames and down to the pixel. We found out who the maker of the camera was. It was a Westcam camera. That's a Canadian-based company that's working with L3. And we tried to get all of the engineering spec data. So we wrote to L3. Do you think that they would cough it up? No. I mean, they're not going to cough up. First off, you're going to tell me about your proprietary piece of equipment and all the wonderful things that I need to be able to do that, right? So were they open and transparent as a company? No, they weren't open and transparent with us. And so we had to then go and work with what little we could get on that, right? Now, you work in the DOD. If you have these cameras and things like that, there are specs that you can go to get that kind of data. You can get all kinds of things about that. So they have a little bit more ability to be able to get that and to get that defense contractor to cough up information than we do out in the public world. But break. Now you've got the public out there getting that same level kinds of equipment to some extent, and they can get that information from the company or whatever like that. And so we have a better chance of getting, in fact, they're developing a lot of the equipment themselves. And so they have a better understanding of it. So we're going to be able to compete on a different level because we're going to be able to get more data and understand the equipment that we're using.
I absolutely love that. Now, Reed, there is a really pretty impressive lineup of speakers and programs at the UAP Summit. Why don't you, both if you wish, walk us through sort of what the folks at home can expect?
Yeah, sure. We've got great talks and really compelling sessions lined up. A lot of this is built on this fundamental premise that at this point in the conversation on UAP, it's really data as the driver. Data is the foundational, a forcing function for disclosure, and data comes from detection. If you can't detect, you can't situate yourself in this domain. You can't understand the potential interactive patterns, flight patterns, possible signaling, communication, or interference that might be taking place. So detection is the beginning. And of course, the idea is to layer that with multiple sources of data, including testimonial data. So just to land that point. But yes, going over to the program, we're going to begin with a talk by Congressman Eric Burleson. And Matt, you'll be emceeing that conversation. Very excited for that. And Eric Burleson will be talking about the current state of UAP from a congressional perspective, both in terms of what Congress is being told and the current state of the bipartisan push to challenge the overclassification of the issue and present transparent and credible findings to the public. So that's really important to set the stage. Then we have Richard Dolan, one of the key historians of the UAP UFO phenomenon, talking about USOs, unidentified submerged objects, which is a very poorly understood, poorly analyzed topic, and also the maritime domain is one in which we have very poor sensing capabilities. So the UAP Summit is going to be kind of pointing all ships in some of these key directions to drive forward and move the ball, yard by yard down the field on this key variable of detection, whether it's in the air, in the sea, or in the near space domain. So Richard Dolan will be giving more of a historical look back on the USO phenomenon, calling out some key cases that really highlight both our capabilities to detect in the maritime and also the deficits. And then moving on, we have a session on Homeland Security and first responders. emceeing that and also presenting will be Monica Alness-Niklaus, who released through the Major Cities Police Chief Organization this UAP guide for law enforcement agencies that came out earlier in 2025, which was an amazing piece itself, in and of itself, and a sign that law enforcement is having to contend with reports and on-site observations of anomalous craft. And they have to be ready for that. And she'll make the point that law enforcement is often really the first line of detection. They are the ones right there on site, eyes in the sky, or talking to people who have literally just had some kind of encounter. And they're collecting mountains of potential testimonial data, but it's not being coalesced in any sort of federal or state or multi-agency capture system yet. But she'll be talking about how we can begin to do that so that we're collecting all this valuable data. And then we have Ryan Graves and Michael Lembeck. Ryan of Americans for Safe Aerospace. Ryan and Michael are also on the AIAA task force on UAP. And they'll be talking about aviation safety, pilot reporting networks, and some of the new technological kind of capabilities that could be deployed in the cockpit on commercial airliners to detect UAP, again, to corroborate what pilots are reporting, which is when you hear these reports from pilots, trained aviation professionals with thousands of hours in the air with an airplane full of passengers, with regulation and law and all these systems governing how they fly, and they're making an observation of an anomalous disk stationary out in the distance or an orb buzzing the aircraft, we have to take that seriously. We cannot dismiss that kind of reporting. And, there are indications. I just interviewed James Fowler on my podcast Emergent last week, And he shared how there are numerous observations now of UAP tagging commercial airliners and potentially interacting with them in the air at very close proximity, well within the safe pocket that's mandated by the FAA regarding commercial flight and how close planes should be to each other. So there's real flight safety risk. There's public safety risk. There are psychological and physiological effects observed from UAP. And so the first 4 sessions of the summit are really going to dive into all of that. And then we go into the current capabilities to detect and track UAP. We have 6 different groups who are either already in the field detecting UAP, attempting to, or who have basically put forward a concept and are getting it funded and deployed. So we'll be learning about, what are they able to detect, at what elevation, with what kinematic behavior, right? In what sort of, multi-sensor detection regimes, right? Can it be corroborated by multiple sensors? So I'm not a technologist or a scientist myself, so I played a part in creating this summit because I am truly curious as to what our current capability is to observe the sky and to present data to the public that's not, within classified systems and so forth. So I'm very curious to attend these sessions myself and see what these groups are capable of doing. We're going to have a talk by John and Jerry Tedesco on their frontline insights out in the field in the New Jersey area with their Nightcrawler RV kitted out with all of these amazing sensor technologies. And so they're doing the public a good service by just being capable technical observers and presenting their findings publicly. They're actually going to be on Emergent in a couple of days as well. So get the conversation started with them. And then the day after, on day 2 of the summit, Richard Dolan will be moderating an international panel of experts on detection and tracking globally. So we'll be learning a little bit about what's happening in primarily Europe. Philippe Belleris of the European Space Agency will be talking about some proposed efforts within the ESA to detect UAP, potentially from space-based platforms, which might actually be very important for USO detection, to do so from space, looking down. And then, oh my gosh, to move through it all, if you'd like, I guess we've got citizen reporting networks and the data infrastructure being built and sustained by MUFON, by CUFOS, the Center for UFO Studies, as well as NUFORC, the National UFO Reporting Center, which remains the destination for people to report UAP through law enforcement and first responder channels. Now, of course, the conversation that we'd like to get going is, well, how do we make a better centralized reporting system? Is there a centralization effort that's possible among all these different data collecting groups? And, Rich, you and I have talked extensively about the challenge of everything from interoperability and characterization of the technologies to data hygiene, as well as to trust. And trust is a big issue in the community, not least of which because there are powerful federal IC and defense groups and organizations that seem to have skin in the game and want to kind of shift the way this is being detected. And so, to my knowledge, there may not have been an effort to really coalesce this coalition and to converge findings and centralize data. But that is a topic we're going to bring up. And Rich, I know you have a lot to say on it.
Let me add one thing, and that is that, the big time is you can get a lot of data, but it's crunching the data and it's actually looking and sifting through the data to actually see if you got something or not, right? And that takes a lot of time, a lot of energy. When we looked at the Aguadilla video, for example, it's a 3-minute, and 54-second video. We spent 2 years analyzing that thing, right? When we looked at the Nimitz thing, we took 1.5 years to go and actually look at that Nimitz and to do all the calculations and the physics and everything else that was required to put that together. That takes time and it takes an effort on the part of some very sincere people to be able to dig through that, right? And right now, if you think about, if we start getting all this wonderful data, which right now is stovepiped all over the place. In other words, nobody's bringing it all together. There's do you have a collective group of scientists that are looking at all that wonderful hypothetical data that's out there? No. And then we get to publish, is there a common repository or a portal I can go to where I can actually publish it and the entire research community can do that? No. We can barely get some sort of paper of articles into journals because of the pushback you get from certain skeptics or groups and that want to push back on those things, right? So ultimately, it's a big challenge, but nobody has been addressing that big challenge, and it's time that we do it. And that's why I'm so behind this summit that it's ridiculous because, I mean, my God, we needed this like 60 years ago when I got started, and we now are finally getting it. So I'm excited that it's finally happening.
Yeah, it's so important. And I think another output from the summit might be an effort to truly and kind of scientifically characterize the detectable signatures of UAP, as well as the technologies that would be required to sense those signatures, and some sort of characterization effort that then all these different groups can begin to kind of shift and comport their efforts to. So no one's competing, everyone's doing it in a different way, but the findings will be much more interoperable than so stovepiped as they are. So very exciting work. Just to move through the sessions of day 2, we have Dr. Gary Nolan presenting on the current status of Skywatcher as they move through their discovery framework. And I know Skywatcher is dealing with the challenge of taking field-based observational data, right, made with everything from, electro-optical, PTZ cameras, et cetera, and binoculars, trained observers capturing observational data. How do you bring that into a scientific framework in which you generate scientifically valid, falsifiable, peer-reviewable data, right? It's a challenge. So how do you bridge that gulf? Look forward to hearing what Dr. Gary Nolan has to say. And then, Matt, you and I are on a panel with Chrissy Newton and Kevin Wright to talk about UAP in society, media education, and how to educate and engage the public in this emerging discourse that's built upon evidence and data as the key driver. We'll also have a scientific foundations panel with scientists from across the board who can talk about, how do we do scientific analysis upon this field-based observational data. So I look forward to that. We have more groups presenting on their current capabilities for UAP detection and tracking. And then to close out the summit, we have James Fowler giving his strategic insights from his time in the Department of Defense, running war games and making some of the initial observations of UAP that gave rise to what is now called the, quote, dog whistle, or the mechanical signaling approach that might be able to cause UAP to come into the vicinity and become more proximal such that we can capture better data. And then, of course, Rich and I will close out the summit on the closing stage, along with Adam Yingling. Adam is our data specialist. He's a lead in a NASA division, and he is an aerospace engineer. So he's going to have a lot to say on data. Rich, you have a lot to say on the technology piece. I am just here to help make it happen and bring it all together. I am not an expert in any of this, so I'm a learner, and I look forward to sitting there with the audience and seeing what we can learn and how we can advance this.
I love that. So Rich, given the ongoing lack of government transparency, would you agree that the summit is really happening at exactly the right time?
I do agree, Matt. I think that the more that we can keep this in front of the public, the better. I think that let me also just put it the one way. What we found from talking with a lot of the politicians is that they're in the dark on this subject too, and just they're early. They're learning. And so the more that we can provide them good information, like our Nimitz findings, by the way, made it up on the Hill thanks to Chris Mellon and a whole bunch of others that helped gut it up on the Hill, right? So I think that academia out there is now starting to engage. We got a number of universities that are suddenly engaged in the topic, and actually research funding is available for them. University of Albany comes to mind. University of Würzburg in Germany is also doing it. You have Rice University, it's playing a part in the subject, and a lot more. So what I'm trying to say is that the more that we can keep this in front of the public and provide them with this, at the same time also keep educating the government, politicians on it, and making them better, then we can get this synergy, if you would, that's going to help to push forward where we need to be. Finally, and so I'm extremely, like I said, I'm at the point where I'm just, excited about all the things that are going on, and the fact that this event is happening finally is, like I said, it's long overdue. And so I'm encouraged that we're going to get all these technologists together to be able to talk. We're going to figure out how we can deal with data, how we can get it researched and studied, and how we can get it published to the public. And, I'm jumping up and down. Sorry, it's hard for me to sit in my seat.
Yeah, no, I feel exactly.
I may tag on,
please,
to that excitement, and also add a few more kind of variables to this moment of singularity that I described, which is really compelling this summit. We're also at the singularity of potential generative AI, basically making UAP photo and video a non-thing, making it absolutely no provenance, no veracity in the public's mind and eye. And the public is being increasingly desensitized to fake UAP footage. So this summit is going to attempt to characterize what it would take to create something of a trust signature, to a high trust way of describing what high credence, high veracity footage would be of UAP, because that is what the public is going to pay attention to most. They want to see it in the sky, and it's going to potentially be possible to do that. But in a world where AI is taking over, the airwaves and the social networks, it's going to be increasingly challenging. We're also in an environment, go ahead, Rich.
No, I was just going to comment real quick on the AI piece. I'm on a show called The Proof is Out There on History Channel. And I've been on it for the last 5 seasons, and I'm on it for 6. And they provide me with these videos that they want me to look at and try to analyze. And I pointed out on the show very clearly that it's getting more and more difficult to research any video because of the level that AI has now introduced into this mix. And so you have there's over like 6 million videos, I think, out on YouTube that are just all over the board, that are largely fakes, that are constructed using all the digital wonderful world, the CG, and all that other stuff. And it's getting extremely more and more difficult for researchers or investigators to actually discern what's AI and what is not AI. So you're spot on in saying AI can be a good thing for us, and it can also be a bad thing for us. So we've got to figure out how we can deal with machine learning and
the
AI.
Good thing.
Yeah.
The benefit is that, I'm just looking at, there's 300,000 case entries in the CUFOS database, 135,000 in the MUFON Aquarius database, 153,000 lines in the NUFORC database. Imagining running a systematic machine learning AI-driven analysis of this data and all of the real-time data coming in from either Mitch Randall's Skywatch, Project Hestelin, Skywatcher, etc. God, we could create real-time insight now into the phenomena.
I love that. Well, Rich, thanks for joining us. Reed, how can folks at home attend this summit?
Simply go to uapsummit.org. The register button is right there. I think we can get a promo code out to folks to help them get in the room. Again, we want people from all over, all sectors of society, academia, engineering, government, non-governmental, intergovernmental. So really encourage people to attend. You'll have instant access to the recordings as well, long before they flow out to the public, which they ultimately will. And you'll have a chance to chat with all of these amazing experts who will be in the space.
Awesome. Well, gentlemen, thanks for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you in a week from now.
Sounds great. Thank you, Matt.
You as well. Take care. Thank you.
Folks, if you enjoyed our show, you will love this episode. Thank you for tuning in. And if you love our channel, please hit that subscribe button.